Hello and welcome to Dr. Poole's SharePoint Surgery session, Top Strategies for Managing Projects with SharePoint. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. If you're interested in trying out the enterprise version of Harmony, please send us a request in the chat window and someone will contact you after the webinar to get you started. We'll also make a recording of the webcast available to you within a couple of days. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Richard Poole, Chief Technology Officer of EMEA at Harmony. Richard heads up the pre-sales team for Harmony across the EMEA and Asia Pacific regions, working both directly with key accounts as well as Harmony's partner channel. Bringing with him 18 years of experience in data management systems, Richard has helped many companies to realize the significant benefits in productivity that collaborative platforms enable. Before joining Harmony in 2011, Richard worked for Dassault Systems PLM for over 10 years. Richard also has a Bachelor of Engineering degree in Automotive Engineering from Loughborough University. Richard, please get us started.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everybody. So the topic of discussion today is project management and managing all the content and communication that relates to working in a project-focused kind of organization. There's lots of different examples where projects are the way that the business is done. A few examples of those are, for example, the construction industry, where it could be a bridge that you're building and designing, or it could be a school or a hospital or a housing estate, or lots of things like that. So each individual project that you're working on, as I say, has lots of parties involved, lots of documentation flying around, and similarly, it could be a transportation type of project, like a new high-speed train being developed and set up or whatever. So there's like the trains that have to run on them. There's the lines. There's the signalling. There's the stations. There's a lot of various components to that. But also things like consultancy. When you're advising somebody or working with a particular client on a particular project. Even things like product design and stuff as well. So it could be like a new car being developed or a concept being put forward, and those kind of things as well. So just to get us started, we'd like to ask you a poll question first.
So please answer the question you see on your screen. How do you currently manage project documentation, communication, calendars, and tasks? Are you using file shares, Exchange, Microsoft Projects, SharePoint, or some other project management system? And I'll give you all a minute to answer. It's very helpful to Richard to see what you're answering, so thank you for voting. And I'm going to put it up. Excellent. So here you go, Richard, are the results.
Excellent, thank you. It was interesting, just as the kind of feedback was coming in, the kind of swing changed from SharePoint to public folders and shared mailboxes. So actually, yeah, the majority, I wouldn't say the majority, but the highest percentage is actually using Exchange for project management, and that's absolutely what I would expect for people. Obviously, kind of moving towards SharePoint. Maybe they're new to SharePoint. There's also some people using file shares for document management, and maybe another project management system like Microsoft Project, for example. So there's definitely a good spread of what people are doing in the audience. And as I say, it's very, very common that people have used things like Exchange and file shares to manage their documents and emails. but people are looking to use SharePoint, which is great. So I think, what are some of the challenges around managing a project? Now, obviously, there's whole project management practices and accreditations and all that kind of stuff. But I think fundamentally the fact that a project, you put together a plan at the beginning of the project, you kind of take into account all the things that you can foresee, all the resources, all the milestones, the costs, the deliverables, all that kind of stuff. So you put together a plan, obviously, but as I'm sure you're all familiar with, things change as a project goes on. There's definitely milestones can change, things can be delayed. There could be lack of resources that are unforeseen, or the price of materials could go up, or the availability of resources could go down, and all those kind of things. So it's constantly changing, and it's always very tight. I mean, you tend to build in some extra time and things to kind of accommodate what you think might happen. But obviously, the budgets and timescales are always very tight, and it's very difficult to stay on top of a project. Now, there's lots of communication as well. I mean, we've just seen that most people are using Exchange to manage the communication, which is, as I say, it's very, very common. A lot of communication between different suppliers, subcontractors, colleagues, and things is done by email. And also, obviously, it could be important information in those emails. But you need to have some kind of easy traceability of who said what and when and what decisions were made. I was just talking to somebody last week who works in a kind of project management environment, and they gave me an example of a case where there was a dispute over like a change having been made to a project. And it came down to one single email that they found in somebody's mailbox that confirmed what was actually instructed. And without that email, they would have lost a lot of money, to be honest. So being able to find those kind of emails, the communication and the documentation is really, really critical when it comes to, as I say, any kind of dispute or any type of discussion point like that. And also, project members in a project can always change. It could be the supplier has changed. It could be the individuals move around, for whatever reason. So you don't really want information locked up in somebody's personal mailbox. You don't want information just in people's heads. You want to get it into a shared environment. And also, different types of projects have different types of duration. It could be a small project that runs for a few weeks, or it could, a conceptual idea or something, looking for a new product to put on the market. Or it could be something like, as I say, a construction project, which could be a number of years. It could be the development of an aircraft or something that is going to go on for many, many years, and also the kind of the overall lifespan of the project as well, not just while delivering it, but also maintaining that project as well. So, as I say, there's really a lot of challenges where there's lots of documentation flying around, and if people are storing documents in file shares and things, it's very difficult to kind of track the kind of different iterations of the documents and who's been sent what version and things. And I think I think a few people said that they were coming from, or they are currently using another project management system. And I think for that to be successful, it needs to integrate into an environment that people are already familiar in. If people are coming from file shares and mailboxes, kind of telling them, you have to go to SharePoint and a web interface and learn a whole different way of working and a different terminology and all that kind of stuff, it's quite difficult for end users. They just want to get their job done at the end of the day. So it's quite important to actually have a solution that people are comfortable with, it's natural for them, and they're spending their time in already. And as I say, I mean, throughout the life cycle of the project, not just when you're planning it and mapping out the concept, but also when you're executing that project and then further down the line actually maintaining it. So it could be like maintenance documentation, enhancements, customer feedback, and changes to the scope and things. So and the other thing is, lots of people in a project could be in different locations. It could be that they're in different countries, different offices, or it could be that some people are on site on the project. Again, I'm going to use construction as a kind of example throughout the session today. But there's people that are on site on the construction site, and there's people back at the office. So you need to have a consistent way of working between those two, but also that adapts to the challenges that those users have. Whether somebody's offline, doesn't have access to the internet while they're, I don't know, on an oil rig or something, or maybe they're just using a phone or a tablet, being able to capture content and access documentation from those different interfaces is really important. So is SharePoint the best solution for a project management and project documentation and communication management system? Many users have come from different systems, as we said. So getting people to use a different interface is very challenging. Obviously, SharePoint is also a very wide platform. So trying to make it very specific can be a challenge. And on its own, as I say, SharePoint in a web browser, it's difficult for end users to accommodate that and change and take it on board and really get running with it straight away. There's going to always be a time for them to get up to speed with that, but also there's generally always quite a lot of pushback on it as well. So I do think that SharePoint is the best platform, but it needs to have that level of integration into the environment people are working with, making it easy to access. And that's where Harmony really comes into its own, because it allows you to manage emails, documentation, and other content in context, in a familiar environment, in a single place. But also you can utilize, when I say single place, you've got a single platform. But actually, even like if you're using, say, Office 365 with SharePoint Online, you may also be using OneDrive and Teams alongside your SharePoint sites as well. And there's different places, different areas that you may want to use those. Obviously, OneDrive for personal documents. I think Teams is great for kind of conceptual ideas and ad hoc sharing of data. And then once you're actually, moving through a project, actually using SharePoint is paramount. So having a single interface to all three of those, and actually being able to even take content from one environment to another in a single interface as well is really, really powerful. Being able to find your content as well as categorize it and capture it in the first place is always important, because if you can't find the content, what's the point in storing it anyway? So all those pieces of the whole puzzle fit together very nicely with Harmony and SharePoint together.
So we'd like to ask you another question. If you could tell us, if you are using SharePoint to manage your projects, what type of data are you using? And you can choose as many of these as are relevant. Okay, let's look at the results.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Susan. Yes, I mean the vast majority, in fact, everybody there is using SharePoint to manage documents if you're using SharePoint. But there's also a fair amount of split between task lists, calendars, contacts, and other custom lists as well. So, I think a lot of people are maybe at different stages of their journey with SharePoint. It's fairly common to start with document management and then add in various different components of where SharePoint can actually help that project as well. So let's focus on that kind of document management for the bulk of today's session, but we'll touch on some of the other kind of capabilities as well. So that both documents and emails are fundamental parts of how you collaborate with your colleagues, your clients, and your subcontractors and partners and things. Because it may be like you're working on a project, and there may be one company that is the project management arm of it, another company that's providing the infrastructure, another company that's providing the design, and another so there could be many different parties involved in a project. So communicating and collaborating with them seamlessly and easily is always a challenge. So firstly, capturing emails and documents nice and easily is the first piece, and then being able to actually, as I say, find that content and send documents and emails to people, but being able to track that information of who's been sent what, where it's been saved, all those kind of things. And also the concept of the fact if you've got documentation in SharePoint and you're sending it to somebody, the best practice is to be using links so that the recipients of that can access the content from where it currently is in SharePoint. But there are instances, for example, where you need to send documents as attachments, maybe to the client who doesn't have access to your SharePoint environment, and also receiving further updates by email with new documents and things, or new versions. So also being able to categorize not only content while you're capturing it, but also as it progresses through the project. Statuses could update, priorities could update and things. And not having to do that on individual items, but also on mass as well. So selecting multiple documents and updating the metadata on all of them is something that lots of people need to do to get their job done nice and quickly in a timely fashion. And as I say, maintaining the document versions is paramount as well, to say who's actually seen or changed the content at what stage. So at that point, we'd like to switch to my Outlook to actually give you a bit of a demonstration of Harmony and what it's all about. So you can see on the desktop, my Harmony is an Outlook sidebar, so I can access my SharePoint sites, my OneDrive, and the teams that I'm a member of in one single interface. So we can see here, for example, that I'm actually a member of a number of teams in Office 365, and so that I can see at a glance the teams that I'm a member of. And if I click into one of those teams, I can see the documentation that has actually been shared with that particular team as well. So likewise, I can move between those teams that I'm a member of, my OneDrive, so just double clicking on here means that I can get to my own personal documentation so that I'm not relying on just storing my documents on my local machine and things. But also, if we then go into a SharePoint site that we're going to use for the purposes of today's session, you can see all the document libraries that I have permission to access, as well as any other lists that I can also access as well. We'll take a look at some of those other lists in a bit more detail later, but we're going to focus on document management at this stage around collaboration. So here we can see that, okay, I've got a number of different document libraries, and there's different approaches to managing documents in SharePoint. One of those could be, for example, using folder structures or document sets to manage your content. But it's very, very advisable to make use of metadata in SharePoint. It's not a file share, so you've got a lot more capabilities there to actually organize your content and work in an easier way. So if I look at this project documentation library here, you'll see that I've got my documents and my content organized by different views defined in the SharePoint library. And Harmony is basically connecting to SharePoint using standard web services. So whatever you've got defined in your SharePoint environment, the libraries, the lists, the sites, will come through into Harmony. So for example here, as I say, I've got a few different views defined. And here we can see that these documents are actually being grouped by the project name. So the project in this case could be a piece of metadata. Now, again, there's different approaches to organizing, the projects in SharePoint. They could be a different site per project. It could be a different site collection. It could be a different library. Or, in this example, I'm just showing it as a piece of metadata. Obviously, with smaller projects, that's quite a good approach. With larger projects, you typically have maybe a different library or different site per project. But as I say, just for illustration here, we're actually grouping these documents by a piece of metadata, in this case, the project name. Now, if I need to capture some emails, for example, some communication that relates to, I'm working on this alpha project at the moment. So I've got a project approval email. Again, going back to that example earlier, being able to find important emails where people have been given like authorization to go ahead with something or make a change by email. You don't want those tied up in people's mailboxes. So getting them into SharePoint means that I can then actually just drag and drop that email into the sidebar. And if I drag it onto the property that I want to save it with, then it will actually assign that metadata to the item as I'm uploading it. Now, obviously, that's then going to be in SharePoint. It's available to anybody who's got permission to access that location in SharePoint as well. And we'll see here that I'm actually just displaying the properties that are being captured by Harmony when I do that. So in this case, it's defining a specific content type in the SharePoint library to use for emails. In this case, I could have different content types in different libraries, and Harmony can detect those. So here we've got corresponding metadata defined against this particular content type. So it could be like the subject of the email that's been mapped across the project approval, who it was sent from and to, who it was copied, when it was sent, the time and the date. So not just when I actually saved it to SharePoint, but when it was sent originally. Also here we can see that there's a couple of required properties. Anything that's required is highlighted with a red dot. And actually in this case, the project name is a required property. But because I dragged it onto the project name in the first place, it's already assigned that for me. So I don't have to actually fill that in manually. Now, obviously, there's other properties there that I could change myself and add specific information and things. So I'm going to go ahead and save that email to SharePoint. Now, if you don't need users to fill in additional information, that property panel doesn't need to be displayed. I'm just doing it for demo purposes at the moment. So the user doesn't have to kind of do it one by one. You can also drag and drop multiple items into the sidebar at the same time. Anything that's been saved to SharePoint is marked with a category to say it's been saved to SharePoint and a note of the actual location as well. So you can see even in Outlook, I can organize my emails to say that these emails have been saved to particular projects. I've done that as a copy operation. It can also be a move operation instead if you don't want the original email to stay in the mailbox. But as you can see here, it is actually a fully contained MSG file. If I double click on it, it will open it back up into Outlook exactly as it was received. Nothing has been changed about it. The email hasn't been forwarded on. There's no additional information other than what was actually received from that particular original sender. So I can reply to it. It could be, obviously, somebody else in the project needs to reply to the original email without me having to forward the email on to relevant people. So being able to do that is really, really important. And you'll notice that we've also created like a unique name for the email. So it's been saved with the subject, the timestamp, and the name of the sender, so that if somebody else tries to save the same email that was sent at the same time and maybe was sent to multiple recipients, then they would get a message to say that it already exists in SharePoint. But also, if you may have lots of emails all with the same subject, but they're different emails, so Harmony would recognize that they are different emails in that instance. So we've also got different views defined there. So in this case, if I just want to see the emails that have been captured and organized by the project name, for example, I can then select that view as well. And I'm also displaying the corresponding email type metadata in that view. So you can kind of create even a conversation type view based on the subject, any of the criteria. It could be the original subject or the message ID or the conversation ID coming from Exchange. We can even preview content from there. So without having to open up the emails themselves, I can just right click and say open up a preview and keep that window open. So I can actually scroll through the different emails that have been captured without necessarily having to open the emails up. Likewise, if I'm working with project documents as well, that preview information also works with Office documents as well. So if I select, for example, a Word document here, it will actually use a standard Office capability, so Word Online, to preview that content in the same kind of interface. So it's very consistent, whether it's a document or an email that I'm working with. And if I want to capture some documentation, I can do that as well. So if I select an email, for example, that's got an attachment, in this case, this project has now moved forward a bit and I've received a draft contract. So I want to capture that into SharePoint as well. So I can simply drag and drop that again onto the subject or the topic or the project in this case that I want to assign it to. And you'll see here that I actually have multiple content types defined in my SharePoint library. So in this case, I'm going to put this in as a proposal, and then the corresponding metadata for that content type is going to be displayed to me. So in this case, I need to select what type of document is it, and also you can see again if there's any required properties and things. So I'm going to go ahead and save that into SharePoint, and likewise, if I've got some content on maybe a file share, again, lots of people said they were using file shares for document management. So it could be like I've got a couple of drawings that I need to get into SharePoint from a file share or from my local machine. So again, I can just drag and drop content from Windows Explorer into the sidebar and then assign, obviously, again, the content type and the metadata to those items. Now that's not blocking my Outlook. I can carry on working while those are being uploaded, and I can set common metadata for each of those. So in this case, I didn't select the project, so I'm going to go and do it from this interface instead. Now, there's a number of different ways you can capture content. We've kind of looked at drag and drop. You can also, right click on an email to say I want to save that to SharePoint. I can right click on attachments and say to save to SharePoint from there as well. Or in fact, I can use the ribbon controls to save content there as well. Now, what about if I need to find some content and actually send it to somebody as a document? So for example, here, there's a number of different ways to find different information in SharePoint. We'll look at a few different ones as we go through, but for example, here, if I've got my document that I want to send, you'll see that Harmony is also available as a sidebar within my email messages and remembers where I've navigated to and the items that I've got selected. So if I was to, let's say I'm working with Susan on this project and say that this is a draft contract. I can then say, please review the, and if I just take that document, I can simply drag and drop it into the email, and it creates a very nicely formatted SharePoint link. Now, Susan can obviously click on that link when she receives it, open it up from SharePoint, or in fact, if she has Harmony, even if she has the sidebar closed or has navigated somewhere else, she can right click on that and say, actually, I want to open that up in Harmony, and Harmony will take her directly to that document so she can easily work on it directly from here. It's nice and easy to work on the content from this interface as well. Now, I'm sure you're probably saying, how do I know if Susan has access to this link or not? And maybe she doesn't. Truth is, I don't personally know if she does. So when I hit send, Harmony can help me by checking whether the recipients have access to the links that I'm sending. And in this case, we can see that actually Susan doesn't have access to this link. So I can grant her view or edit capabilities depending on whether you've got the ad hoc sharing capabilities enabled in SharePoint. And also, even if it's an external party, if you've got external sharing enabled, then it will actually send us a special invitation to that external user with a PIN they have to fill in and all that kind of stuff. But in this case, I don't necessarily want to grant access to this particular document because maybe I'm sending it to the client. So in this case, I'm going to remove that link, and I actually want to send it as an attachment. So I can do that just by holding down the Alt key while I drag and drop, and the document will then be attached to the email that I can then send on its way to Susan. Now, if we fast forward a few steps, we could say, actually, I've sent that contract to the client, they've made some changes to it, and very helpfully, they've changed the file name and sent it back to me with their changes. Now, getting that back into SharePoint is a bit of a challenge because if I save that into SharePoint now, it's going to be considered a completely different document. It's got a different file name. However, I actually want to save it as a new version of the existing contract that we've got in SharePoint. I want to maintain that version history. So if I just drag and drop the attachment on top of the existing document that I just sent out, then you'll see if I wait for a few seconds, I can choose to add it as a new version. That will check out the document from SharePoint, rename the attachment I've just selected back to the original file name, and check it back in and prompt me to fill in or update any of the metadata on the new version of that document. So for example here, I could say, okay, actually the status is now that it's in process and we're in discussion with the client. As that is then checked in, made available to other users. So it's really nice and easy to work both internally and externally with clients, colleagues, and subcontractors and things. So let's take a look at a few other scenarios around kind of project management. Accessing the content is always a challenge, not only from Outlook, which we've looked at in quite detail so far, but also other Office applications and from other devices. So let's take a look at Harmony, for example, in Word or Excel. It might be that lots of people are working on a project specification or something. It could be a long process, a big lengthy document, and being able to actually save content and open content to and from SharePoint directly from within Word, Excel, and PowerPoint is paramount. So Harmony has integrations to those products. So you can see here, if I want to save this document to SharePoint, I can then choose the location that I want to save that to. It could be recent locations, favorite locations, sites I'm following, for example, and then I can go through the process of actually saving the content and assigning the metadata and things. But also, we actually integrate to the standard open and save dialogues as well. So if I want to save this document into SharePoint, obviously Microsoft in the latest versions of Office give some level of integration. For example, I can choose my OneDrive or like a recent site that I've connected to, but maybe I actually want to browse through my SharePoint environment. So in this case, what we can do is we can see that I've got access to what we call Harmony favorites. Now, these are favorite locations that you may have added from the Outlook UI. So anything that you navigate to, it could be a folder, a view, a library, or a filtered view, for example. You can add those as favorites, and there's a number of different options there to make them available offline, for example, make them available as Outlook folders so you can drag and drop emails into them. But they'll also appear in your Office applications as well. So I can easily just select, okay, the construction library there and save my content to it, or open content from there. As we said, also, I think it's quite common that people need access to SharePoint and their content from different devices. So if we take a look at my iPad as an example, you'll see that I have a Harmony app on my desktop, on my homepage there, and we can see also that I've got access to a number of different areas within SharePoint. So these can be synchronized between your devices. Likewise, seeing the sites that you're following, your OneDrive and your favorites, for example. But if we go into that demo environment that we were using so far, and I select that construction site as an example, you'll see that I can get to all the associated task lists and document libraries and things. So like on that point, if we take a look at a task list, you'll see all the views that are defined against that task list. So it might be any late tasks or overdue tasks can be seen in a nice, easy way. I can also then follow that specific view and be notified when new updates or new tasks have become overdue. But we can also, for example, select one of those tasks and see all the information about it. I can also go ahead and update or assign that task to a different user nice and easily. If we take a look at carrying on the kind of document scenario that we looked at before and take a look at this project documentation, we'll see that actually, again, all the views that are configured there are nice and easy to display. So for example, if I just want to show this as a grid, I can see the corresponding metadata. Let's say I want to see the project emails organized by the project name and with the relevant columns displayed. And you'll also see that I can actually filter this information by that metadata as well. So I've actually got an example where I've added as a favorite a filtered view in a library. So it could be this alpha project that we were working on before, and you'll see all of the content that we've actually captured already. What I can do when I add that as a favorite, if I just edit that for a second, you'll see that I can also make it available offline, so that when I disconnect from the SharePoint or from the internet, I would be able to see and work on that content in the same way. So all the metadata and the files are actually synchronized to the device. And for example, if it's a PDF, it could be, in this case, maybe one of those plans that's been uploaded, and I can open that up into a built-in viewer in the Harmony mobile application, and I can actually, even annotate it. So it might be like actually something needs to change about this particular area in this project, and maybe I need to add some comments and things. But I can mark that up from a tablet device, as I say, even when I'm offline, and then I can update it with a new version, create a new revision with my annotations. So there we go, it's updating, it's uploading it into SharePoint, and this is this basement floor plan. And you can see that it's now synchronized back to SharePoint. Again, if I went offline here, let's just go on a second into flight mode, you'll see that Harmony will then detect that I'm working offline, and I can still carry on making further changes to these items. It could even be like an email that's been received and captured. We've got all the metadata there, but we can also view the email in the application as well. So if I now just switch back to my Outlook and say, okay, hold on a second. We just updated the basement floor plan. So if I now have a look at that from here and even preview that just from within the sidebar, you would see the annotations that we added from my iPad just a moment ago. So it's nice and consistent way of working, whether you're in the office or out on site. And something I touched on briefly is being notified when there's new updates, both on the mobile client and on the desktop, where you're following locations as favorites. You can be notified when there's new updates in any of those. So they could be a task list, it could be a document library, or it could be a view of documents to say, okay, I want to be notified when maybe a task has been updated or when a document has been saved or checked out. So anything that you add as a favorite, as I say, you can follow that for activity. And then basically what you have is an update stream that you can display, and you can choose what you want to display in that particular interface. So we've got a list of my favorite locations, and we can see, for example, that one of my colleagues, Sam in this case, has uploaded or updated some content against a particular project, and everything is contextual here. So I can actually go and click on those, and it will take me directly to that information in the relevant location. Or I can click on the person's name, I can see their status in Skype for Business, for example. I can right click on their name and start a chat session with them if I want to discuss anything. So there's a really nice way of being notified rather than me having to go and chase updates for a project. And as a project manager, that's really quite handy, because you may be managing multiple projects. So adding those as favorites, following them, and being notified when there's ever a new update in any of the projects that you're working on, without having to either go looking for it or be bombarded by lots of email notifications that people end up just ignoring because they get too many of them. I think the last thing is, obviously in a project, you've typically worked in similar projects in the past, and maybe other people have. So you want to capitalize on reusing that information, that experience. So for example, if I actually want to find maybe a template or a document that I've used in the past, maybe there's been an incident on this particular project. Now I can search just by clicking in the top of the sidebar, and I can then choose the scope of that search as well. So I can either search, in this case, in this particular library, but it might be I actually want to widen that scope of that search and search for maybe incident reports that have been used on other projects in other areas and things. So I can simply search from there, excuse me, and I can see actually there is a template there that I can obviously preview and check the content of that. And then it might be, okay, yeah, that's what I need, but I need to obviously fill in the details for this particular incident. So what I can then do is I can copy that document and go and paste a copy of that into this particular SharePoint library as well. So I can use keyboard shortcuts and contextual menus and things to actually paste that and say that this is now an incident report, and have the opportunity to rename it so I don't get 1,000 incident reports all called template. But in this case, I actually want to update the name of that report to say, okay, it's actually to do with a particular incident number or something, and then select everything as necessary. So then I can go ahead and, like we saw before, assign the metadata and save that as a new document, and then go and open it and edit it and fill in all the blanks. And we also touched on at the beginning, different areas of SharePoint Online, on Office 365. SharePoint could be one of those parts. OneDrive is another. Teams and groups are others as well. So being able to actually not only access content from those different interfaces or different repositories in a single interface, but actually reusing data as well, or going through the life cycle of a project, because it might be, for example, I've got a concept that I'm looking at now. I've been tasked with doing something, and maybe I've put together a new supplier contract in my OneDrive. What I can then do, like we saw before, I can copy that document and maybe put a copy of it in a team to share it with some people, or put it into a SharePoint library. So if I just hold down the back button there, you'll see a history of everything we've navigated to, and we can see that we can go directly back to that project view that we were creating before, and it even remembers the last item or items that I had selected there. So again, I can go ahead and paste that document into this particular library now. Again, I can use keyboard shortcuts like Control-C, Control-V and things, and then I'm going to put that in as a new proposal, new contract, or whatever that we want to use for this particular project. So with that, we'd just like to ask one final question.
And that is, are you already using Harmony? And whether you are or not using Harmony, would you be interested in trying the Enterprise Edition if you're using the free version right now? And while you're answering that question, here's your opportunity to ask other questions of Richard. I see a couple have already come in, so I'm going to start here. Richard, what versions of SharePoint are supported in Harmony?
Okay, obviously I've been using SharePoint Online for this demonstration today. That's the environment we personally use. But Harmony does also support all on-premise versions of SharePoint, back to even WSS3 and upwards. So you could be working in a hybrid environment. You could be using a very old version of SharePoint. You could even be using SharePoint Foundation. We support all of the different flavors of SharePoint, as I say, back from WSS3 through 2007, 2010, 2013, 2016, and SharePoint Online, because we actually connect using the same methods to all of them. So it's a single instance of the Harmony install, and can connect to different multiple versions of SharePoint.
Great, thank you. And the next question I see is, and the Word add-in that you showed, is that a separate installation? Because if I'm already using the Enterprise Edition, but I don't see it in my Word.
Yeah, okay, so there's two components, because obviously I touched on two different ways of saving and opening content from Word. The actual app that, or let's first it because it's still up, the integration here into the standard save and open dialogues was added, I think, about a year or so ago into Harmony. So as long as you've got Harmony installed, you should have those available in the standard dialogues there, because it actually writes those to the Office registry. So there's no install required other than the Outlook installation. However, the add-in that we showed here, with the ribbon controls and the sidebar here, it's actually an Office app. So you install it from the Office App Store. It is available for Office 365 environments, because that's where the Office Store is kind of limited to that. There's zero install. You just basically need to enable it. An admin can enable it for end users on their behalf and grant permissions and things like that. So it doesn't have to be the user that actually adds that. But basically, if you went to like the insert menu here and went to the Office Store and the add-ins, you would see that, okay, I've got the Harmony add-in there, which was added by my administrator. But you can go to the store and search for Harmony and then add it yourself if you've got permission to do so.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is, someone said they're not able to filter the way you were showing on theirs. Harmony, the filter icon is grayed out.
Okay, yes. So if we go back to Harmony for a moment, let's just save that document. Oh, let's cancel that. Yeah, go on. So yeah, I mean, obviously we touched on like filtering and searching and things, and you can see here that we've got a few different ways of filtering. One is this button here that it may be grayed out in your environment. It's specific to tags and terms. So if you have managed metadata or enterprise keywords defined in the library, then that button will be enabled. If you click on it, you can then filter by those kind of fields. So in this case, if I want to look for something that's been tagged as a contract, let's see if there is one. No, so there's no values there. But if I went to, for example, this document library here and filtered by, let's say, contract, because I know there's one there, then it's actually just going to show me items that have that metadata defined. As I say, if that's grayed out for you, it's because you don't have managed metadata or enterprise keywords enabled in the library. That's something you obviously do from SharePoint side. But fear not, you can also filter by other columns as well. So you can see here that I'm displaying a number of different properties. It could be like the who the document was modified by. So I can right-click on the header there and say that I want to filter by that particular attribute and say I'm just interested in documents that have been modified by Annie and Dave in this instance. So that then shows me a subset of the data there. But also I can then categorize by or filter by further information as well. So let's say I'm just interested in things that have been tagged as applicable to Ernst & Young, for example. And then we can see a nice filtered view of content that meets those criteria there in the interface.
Great, thank you. We're coming up to the hour, so I'm just going to ask one more question. How do you make sure that you have the latest version of Harmony? Are there automatic updates?
So there's a free version of Harmony that you basically install yourself, and you can check for updates from here. The enterprise version, which adds support for things like mapping header information from your emails and various other capabilities, can be centrally managed, and typically is centrally managed by your IT. So you can always access the latest version of Harmony from your download area as a customer, and then typically you would push that out so all users have the same version. But you can always check the version that you have by clicking on the About, and the current latest version is 6.7. So you can always also check the latest version of Harmony by going to our website and going to the support area. We just have a look at that for a second, go to the documentation and click on what's new. You'll see what's been added at each version. And what you can also do is you can be notified about any new updates by following our blog. So if you click on the blog there and subscribe to that, you'll receive notifications whenever there's a new update. For example, here, the 6.7, which was released a few months ago.
Great, thank you, Richard. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. You will receive an email with a link to view the webinar again with a couple of days, and we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar. Thank you.